it's funny that you would mention Apple, because Apple TV has taken over the screen that's behind you and has replaced the picture that you had with with commercials for its shows. So are you saying that companies are now able to use Bitcoin basically as their savings account, as their piggy bank, and that something like this wasn't even possible before? And what about central banks?
Hold on one second. No free commercials for Apple.
I hope Apple stock didn't just crash.
Yeah, they'll do okay. Coming back to the issue of central banks, I think that the third catalyst before we get to central banks is just banks in general, right? Spot ETF is first on your checklist. Fair value accounting is second on your checklist, and then the embrace of companies like Deutsche Bank and Santander and J.P. Morgan and Bank of America and the like. That's third on the list. And I think as we start to see those banks step up and become custodians, first they'll be custodians, then they will actually begin offering financing and collateral, and accept Bitcoin as collateral. And then you'll start to see a whole set of Bitcoin derivatives and new products. Instead of just pure Bitcoin, you might see Bitcoin integrated with fixed income offerings, Bitcoin with volatility hedging. You might see Bitcoin-backed insurance plans, Bitcoin-backed bonds, all sorts of other Bitcoin-backed securities that'll be banked. And that will eventually ripple. So I think with regard to sovereigns, we already know some sovereigns are buying Bitcoin and they're mining Bitcoin. You know, we've seen announcements from El Salvador, from Oman, from Bhutan, right, from the Emirates, and so that's spreading. But I think that'll continue to spread. But the next probably big support will come from sovereign wealth funds. And the sovereign wealth funds, first they'll take positions via the spot ETFs, and then they'll take positions via other companies, right? As companies embrace Bitcoin and put it on their treasury. Look, if Apple Computer just stopped dividending out their stock or stopped dividending out their cash flows and just started buying Bitcoin with their cash flows, the nature of the company changes, right? And any company that's a cash cow that starts accumulating assets in Bitcoin becomes one part power company, one part Bitcoin company, one part software company, one part Bitcoin company. And the degree to which you're a Bitcoin company versus a food company or an ice cream company or a real estate company just comes down to the portion of your enterprise value, which is based upon the P&L, versus the portion of your enterprise value, which is based on your balance sheet. Right, and you know, Berkshire Hathaway is an example of a company where a lot of it's based on its balance sheet. For example, substantially all of the success of Berkshire Hathaway is due to an investment in Apple stock in the past 10 years. And the returns of Apple stock for Berkshire Hathaway dwarf every other decision made in the last 50 years. Like nothing else that Berkshire Hathaway did mattered except to the extent that it allowed them to make the Apple investment. And so that, you know, you could think of them as like a big tech stock in a way, because they reoriented their balance sheet to one big tech asset, Apple. I think we'll see the same with regard to corporations and investors with Bitcoin. And countries typically are the most conservative, so it'll be the small countries. It'll be the nimble operations. It'll be the El Salvadors and the Madeiras and the Bhutans and the UAEs and the Omans. They'll move first. And the large countries, they'll be more conservative for good reason. They don't have to move, right? And they'll take their time getting there. But that's why you should think about this as coming in layers and waves. You know, the first layer, the second layer. The next step will be gold funds that own a bunch of gold will sell half their gold and buy Bitcoin with it. And then hedge funds that have no Bitcoin will allocate 1%, and then 5%, and then 10%. And then companies that have no Bitcoin will allocate 5%, then 10%. And you don't, you know, there's this joke, right? Maybe it's Einstein said it. The reason we need time is so that everything doesn't happen all at once. So it's, you know, you might be frustrated as not happening too fast, but you don't want it to happen too fast, right? If it happened too fast, Bitcoin would go to, if I said to you, guess what? Everybody watched Michael Saylor's talk and everybody on Wall Street agrees with him. And so they all bought Bitcoin. Tomorrow morning, you would wake up and Bitcoin would be $8 million a coin. And what would you think? You would think, dang, I should have bought more when I wish it didn't happen so fast. You don't want it to happen that fast. Right now, we're in this very ideal situation. We'll remember this time period fondly. We'll look back at this. Bitcoin trading at 26,000. We all know what's about to happen. We all know corporations are going to adopt it. Wall Street's going to adopt it. We know the ETFs are coming. We know the capital is coming. We know everyone's going to wake up and figure this out, but they don't have the ability to buy it yet. So you know the future, but it has not manifested itself in the price. You're going to wish, you know, for these days back, because these are the days where you can work in a job at McDonald's and you can make whatever X dollars an hour and go buy Bitcoin. And one day, you know, you'll look back and say, I was actually making the equivalent of $8,000 an hour at McDonald's, right? And you know, if you actually are smart enough to work at McDonald's and buy Bitcoin right now, in 10 years, you're going to realize it was the most lucrative thing you did your entire life. And when everybody else embraces these big three ideas, when the banks custody Bitcoin, when the spot ETF is here, when companies are using Bitcoin on their treasury, then that opportunity is lost to you. And instead of buying Bitcoin at 25,000, you're buying Bitcoin at $1 million. And here's the way you should think of it. You're taking a 40x pay cut. You see, whatever you're making right now is going to be worth 40x less. So take what you're making right now, multiply by 40. That's what you get paid, right, in fiat in order to use Bitcoin as a treasury asset and keep one foot in the fiat world, because you understand the future, but the rest of the world, 99% of the world, hasn't caught up with you. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think they all know, right? I mean, a lot of them know. Some of them don't, but a lot of them know. But I sat with a guy's got $1 trillion in capital under management, and he couldn't buy the Bitcoin even if he wanted to. He couldn't, because he doesn't have the accounting systems, the on-ramps, the regulatory wrapper. So there are people out there that have more money than you that may actually perceive the same thing you perceive. They can't buy it yet. You should count yourself lucky if you actually have the ability to acquire it right now, right? Because you jumped through the hoops, you got KYC'd on a crypto exchange, because you've got a relationship, right? You have an advantage. The advantage is for a window of time. It will actually never be this good again, in my opinion.
Well, we might not be able to move the Apple stock, but it's absolutely possible that 1,000 people were now smashed by Bitcoin on their phones and move the Bitcoin price a little bit after you make us feel a little bit bullish here. We here in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, we do not have a MicroStrategy. We do not have politicians that talk about Bitcoin on the level that you have. We don't have the rules, the SEC. We don't have Wall Street. But I can tell you from my personal perception that outside the US, this is by far the strongest Bitcoin scene, with builders, investors, content creators, the lot. What's your message?
My message is the die is cast. We have crossed the Rubicon. We have crossed the event horizon. Before COVID, before 2020, there were lots of questions about would Bitcoin be adopted by Wall Street? Would Bitcoin be adopted by the United States? Would Bitcoin be embraced as an asset class by the mainstream? A lot of milestones took place to take us to where we are today. The end of the block size wars was pivotal. The entry of Fidelity into this ecosystem was pivotal. They were an early leader. The COVID crisis was pivotal. If there was no COVID, I never would have bought Bitcoin. MicroStrategy would not be involved in Bitcoin. No, we would not have been allowed to even consider it. So COVID catapulted us into the space, and following us, we saw dozens of publicly traded Bitcoin miners catapulted into the marketplace when Wall Street caught fire. And then we saw the entrance of Square, Cash App, now Block, PayPal. We saw the embrace, first the challenge of the accounting treatment. No one was concerned about the problem of Bitcoin accounting when there were no publicly traded companies with Bitcoin. So it became notable when public companies entered the space, and within 36 months, we had the accounting community embracing Bitcoin. And the politicians, right? Cynthia Lummis was elected, right? She came to DC as a senator. The Biden administration brought Gary Gensler to office, and Gensler has probably noted the unique innovation of Satoshi on no less than a dozen occasions, right, under congressional testimony. So Bitcoin came to Congress, Bitcoin came to the Senate, Bitcoin came to the White House, Bitcoin came to Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. Bloomberg, launched their crypto coverage. All of these things happened, and that ushered Bitcoin back in front of all the money managers, first with the futures ETF. But we couldn't have the spot ETF if we didn't have the futures ETF. So the futures ETF created more demand for the spot ETF. And all of the crypto controversy created all the lawsuits, which created the clarity coming from the legal system that Bitcoin is a commodity. So these last 36 to 48 months have been pivotal. We've now reached this point where it's clear that Bitcoin is going to be successful. It is going to be embraced. It's just a question of to what degree will you benefit from, right? So I'm not worried about Bitcoin anymore. You shouldn't worry about Bitcoin, right? People that are launching these spot ETFs, they're not worried about Bitcoin. They're not trying to change Bitcoin. They've only got one question on their mind, which is, how do I make sure that my ETF is the most successful one? How do I make sure that my Bitcoin offering is the most successful one, right? And that's the question you should ask yourself, right? How are you going to stack? The winner is the person who stacks the most effectively. If you're going to contribute to Bitcoin, how are you going to create a Bitcoin product or service that respects the protocol that provides value to the billions of people that are going to want it? If you're offering a Bitcoin security or a Bitcoin financial product, how do you create the one that people are going to want? If you're analyzing Bitcoin or advocating or educating, the question is just how are you going to do that most coherently, most effectively? And I think that's the challenge that all of us face. If you stay focused on Bitcoin, stay cheerful, stay constructive, don't let the trolls distract you, right? Like someone wants you to basically sell all of your worldly goods, because the world is coming to an end because of too much something in the atmosphere in 100 years. Don't get distracted. Don't get distracted by someone that wants you to change the code, change the protocol. There's nothing wrong with Bitcoin, right? The issue is, what's wrong with you, right? Do you have your head screwed on straight? Are you focused? Are you doing everything you can do? Bitcoin doesn't need your help. You need to help yourself. And so I think that's my message to the audience is focus upon what you can do for Bitcoin, right? Like focus on how you're going to embrace the protocol. You're either a buyer or an investor. That's good. Or you're an advocate. That's good. And, you know, if you're using your fame, your power, your money in order to further the Bitcoin ecosystem with humility, respecting Satoshi, respecting the protocol, respecting the work done by people before you, right? Then you're going to be successful and happy. And I think the people that are fighting it, right? The people working on the next Bitcoin, the people that are trying to fix it, I think they're just squandering their life's energy. They're not going to be successful. They're not going to be happy, right? Because the writing is on the wall here, right? And the great irony is Bitcoin is poised, you know, for 100x from here. And you have all the information to figure it out. And so if you're jaded, if you're fatigued, if you're bored, if you've decided to move on to the next thing, if you're trading altcoins to get more Bitcoin, if you're juggling razor blades, if you're fighting with people on Twitter to try to fix Bitcoin, right? You've lost the plot, right? It's the great tragedy would be after 15 years, Bitcoin emerges to take its rightful place in the universe as the humanity's first and only sound money. And when it finally reached that point, you get distracted and went off to do something else. I would say focus on Bitcoin. Put the laser eyes back on.
Michael Saylor, thank you for this message. Thank you for taking the time for doing this interview, not just for me, but from all the people in the audience here. I hope we can do this again in 1 year and see what has happened in the meantime, because so much is happening. But I do think we understand now why you don't get tired of talking about Bitcoin. And thank you also for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but everybody in the audience and everybody who's a Bitcoin believer, thank you for everything that you do for Bitcoin. Every single person makes a difference.
Thank you, Michael Saylor.